At Christmas dinner, my wife and I started arguing. My mother-in-law slapped me 3 times and spat. "You're trash. My daughter deserves better." Then she pointed at my 5-year-old daughter. "Take that trash and get out." I took my daughter's hand. "Let's go." 2 hours later, the police arrested me. My wife claimed I had hurt her and kidnapped our daughter. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. 3 weeks before Christmas, the kitchen in the Prescott house smelled like burnt coffee and cold rain. Colin Prescott sat at the table with his laptop open and a shoebox of receipts beside his elbow. The heater clicked on somewhere behind the wall. Outside, sleet tapped the window in short bursts, like someone tapping a fingernail against glass to get his attention. He had been at the table for 2 hours. The spreadsheet on his screen was simple. Colin liked simple. He was a municipal building inspector, and his whole career had been built on the idea that numbers either added up or they didn't. A beam either carried the load or it failed. There was no arguing with a load calculation. There was no charming it into behaving. He scrolled down the column. Mortgage, utilities, Maisie's preschool, health insurance, groceries, car payment. All of it fine. All of it planned. He had built this budget the same year Maisie was born, and he had adjusted it every January since, the way a man tightens the bolts on something he intends to keep. Then he scrolled a little further, into the section he had started 6 months ago and had been avoiding ever since. He had labeled it simply, Judith, $1,200 for overdue rent, $640 for an electric bill, $430 for a car repair, $900 for another month's rent. Colin rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. His eyes stung from the screen. He had a headache building behind his right eye, the dull kind that came from clenching his jaw without noticing. He clicked the cell at the bottom of the column. The total appeared in plain black text. $4,170. He stared at it. It wasn't the number that bothered him. He had known the number was large. It was the shape of it, the way it climbed month after month without ever pausing, the way each payment had felt reasonable on its own and unreasonable when you lined them up in a row. The hallway floor creaked. He heard the soft slap of slippers on tile. Elena walked into the kitchen wearing her gray robe, her hair pulled back, a phone in her hand. She went to the counter first, poured herself half a cup of the burnt coffee, made a face at it, and set it down without drinking. She didn't ask what he was doing. She already knew. "Did you send Mom the money?" Colin looked up from the screen. "Not yet." Her mouth tightened. It was a small movement, barely there, but he had been married to her for 8 years, and he could read that mouth like a warning label. "She needs it tomorrow." "I know. She'll get evicted." Colin turned the laptop toward her. The screen light caught her face and made her look pale. "Elena, I've already given your mother over $4,000 this year." Elena glanced at the screen, not at the numbers, at the screen. There was a difference, and he saw it. "She paid some of it back." "No." Colin kept his voice level. "She promised to." Elena crossed her arms. The robe sleeve slipped down her wrist. She was wearing the bracelet he had given her on their 5th anniversary, a thin silver chain with a small flat charm shaped like a house. She had loved it back then. She had cried when she opened the box. "She needs help," Elena said. "I've helped. She's your family too." Colin looked at her for a long moment. The sleet tapped the glass. "That's exactly why I've helped her," he said. Something shifted in Elena's expression. Not softening, recalculating. He had seen the same look on contractors when they realized their inspector had actually read the plans. "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying we can't keep doing this." She waited. She wanted him to fill the silence, to add a but, to add a maybe this once. He had done exactly that a dozen times before. Each time, the silence had been the trap, and he had walked into it smiling. He didn't fill it this time. Elena set her phone on the counter, hard enough that it made a sound, and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Colin listened to her footsteps go down the hall. He heard the bedroom door close. Not slammed, closed with control, which was worse. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at his spreadsheet. The argument wasn't over. He knew that the way he knew a foundation crack would spread. You could paint over it. You could tell yourself it looked fine. But the pressure was still there, moving under the surface, and the wall would tell the truth eventually. He closed the laptop and went to check on his daughter. Maisie was asleep with one arm hanging off the mattress and her stuffed rabbit crushed under her chin. She was 5. Her room smelled like the lavender lotion Elena put on her after baths. There was a night light on the wall shaped like a moon, throwing a soft yellow glow across the carpet. Colin lifted her arm back onto the bed and pulled the blanket up. She stirred. "Daddy, go back to sleep, kiddo. Is it Christmas?" He smiled without meaning to. "Not yet. Soon. Okay." She was already gone again. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. He thought about the $4,000. He thought about her college fund, which had $11,000 in it and should have had more. He thought about the emergency account he kept, the one that would carry them for 4 months if he ever lost his job. He thought about how many people in his life had told him he was lucky to have work like his, and how none of them had ever asked how many nights he had spent studying for the certification exams while Elena slept. He turned off the hall light and went to bed. Elena was awake. He could tell by her breathing. Neither of them said anything. The phone rang at 7:40 the next morning. Colin was standing at the counter in his work jacket, thermos in one hand, keys in the other. He saw the name on the screen and felt his stomach tighten before his brain caught up. Judith Carver. He almost didn't answer. He stood there for 3 full rings, thumb hovering, and then he pressed the green circle. Ignoring her never worked. Ignoring her only meant a longer conversation later, with more people in the room. "Colin, I need you to transfer $1,500 today." No hello. No good morning. Judith always started conversations the way other people finished them. "For rent." "Yes." Colin set the thermos down on the counter. "I already paid last month's rent." There was a small pause on the line. Behind her voice, he could hear a television, some morning show with an audience laughing. That money was used for other things. Colin stared out the kitchen window at the frost on the driveway. His truck sat under a thin white shell. "What other things?" "That isn't your concern. It becomes my concern when you're asking me for another $1,500. Judith sighed. It was a long, theatrical sound, the kind of sigh that was meant to be heard from another room. "You married my daughter," she said. "You have responsibilities." "I understand. Then act like a husband." Colin looked down at the phone in his hand. His thumb had gone white where he was gripping it. He made himself loosen his fingers. "I am acting like a husband," he said. "I'm trying to make sure Elena and Maisie are financially secure." The warmth went out of her voice all at once. It was the fastest weather change he had ever heard from a human being. "You've changed." "No. I'm just saying no." She hung up. Colin stood in the quiet kitchen with the dialed tone hum in his ear. The refrigerator kicked on. Out on the road, a school bus groaned past. He picked up his thermos and went to work. He spent the day walking through a half-finished commercial build on the north side of town, in the cold, with a clipboard in his hand and his breath making clouds. The framing crew had cut 2 notches in a load-bearing stud, and the site manager tried 3 different ways to convince him it was fine. Colin listened to all 3. Then he pointed at the stud. "You can fix this today, or you can fix it in February when I fail the whole run. Your call." The site manager swore under his breath and called for the lead carpenter. That was the part of the job Colin was good at, not the paperwork. The part where somebody smiled at him and explained why the rules shouldn't apply, and he said no and the world did not end. He wondered, driving home in the dark with the heater blowing on his knuckles, why it was so much harder to do that at his own kitchen table. Elena was waiting for him. She had made dinner, which she rarely did on weeknights. Chicken and rice. The good plates. Maisie was already eating, talking about a boy in her class who ate a crayon. They got through the meal. Colin listened to his daughter and laughed in the right places and felt the pressure building behind his wife's silence like water behind a door. When Maisie went to wash her hands, Elena set her fork down. "Mom's furious." "I figured." "She cried on the phone with me for 20 minutes. Colin nodded slowly. "I'm sorry she's upset." "That's it. What else is there?" Elena leaned back in her chair and studied him. And then she said the thing he had not expected, the thing that told him this had stopped being about rent a long time ago. You have no problem spending money on yourself. Colin stared at her. I bought a new pair of work boots 6 months ago. You bought expensive ones. They were $180. He heard his own voice go flat. They're steel toe. I walked through job sites full of rebar and nail guns. And you can't give Mom $1,500? This isn't about boots. It is about priorities. Colin closed the laptop that had been sitting at the far end of the table since morning. The click was small and final. No, he said. It's about boundaries. Elena stood up and started clearing plates that weren't finished. She ran the water hot enough to steam. She scrubbed a pan that was already clean. Colin watched her back and thought about the first apartment they had rented, the one over the hardware store, where the radiator banged all night, and she used to laugh about it. He thought about how she used to check his hands for splinters after he worked weekends on the deck. He thought about how somewhere in the last few years, the woman who checked his hands had become a woman who checked his balance. He didn't know exactly when it had happened. He only knew that it had. Christmas Eve came with a hard gray sky and the smell of wood smoke over Cedar Ridge. Colin spent the morning with Maisie, cutting paper snowflakes at the coffee table and taping them to the front window. She wanted every single one hung at her eye level, which meant the bottom 2 feet of the glass were crowded with lopsided paper, and the rest was empty. He hung them exactly where she pointed. "Grandma's coming," Maisie said. "She is. Is she going to be nice?" Colin's scissors paused for a half-second. "Why would you ask that?" Maisie shrugged and folded another square. "Sometimes she uses her loud voice." Colin looked at his daughter's small hands working the paper. 5 years old, and already keeping records. "She'll be nice," he said. "It's Christmas." Elena spent the afternoon cooking. She was good at it when she wanted to be. The house filled up with the smell of roasting turkey and onions and butter, and for a few hours it was almost easy. She turned on the record player Colin's uncle had given them and put on old holiday songs with a hiss under the music. She hummed. She let Maisie stir things. Colin set the table. For places. He put out the cloth napkins. For a little while he let himself believe it might hold. Judith arrived at 6 with snow on her coat and a bottle of wine in one hand. She hugged Maisie first, loudly, and told her she had grown a foot. She kissed Elena on the cheek. She gave Colin a nod and a smile that never reached the rest of her face. "Smells wonderful," she said. "Thank you," Elena said. They ate. It went well for 20 minutes. Judith talked about a woman from her old church who had married badly. She talked about the price of everything. She refilled her own wine glass twice without asking. Maisie asked if she could open one present before bed. Colin said one. Elena said none. Judith said, "Oh, let the child have her Christmas." And Colin watched his wife smile and give in. Then Judith reached into her purse. She did not bring out a gift. She brought out a folded sheet of paper, opened it flat with 2 fingers, and set it down beside Colin's plate. She smoothed it once, the way a bank teller smooths a form. Colin looked at it. It was a list handwritten in blue ink, with dollar amounts down the right side in a neat column. Rent, electric bill, car insurance, credit card payment. The fork was still in his hand. He set it down carefully on the edge of the plate. "What is this?" "My expenses," Judith said. The record player hissed into the gap between songs. Elena said quietly, without looking up, "Mom needs help." Colin turned his head and looked at his wife, and then at his mother-in-law, and understood that this had been planned. Not on the drive over. Days ago. Maybe the same night Elena had closed the bedroom door with such careful control. "I've already paid her rent twice this year," he said. And that single word came from Judith, and it landed on the table like a dropped glass. She leaned forward, elbows on either side of her plate, wine glass held loosely. "You're making more money than you need." Colin felt something in his chest go still and cold and very clear. "You don't know what I need. I know my daughter married a man who promised to take care of her. I take care of my wife and daughter." Judith tapped the paper twice with one manicured finger. "Then prove it." Colin looked at the list, at the blue ink, at the column of numbers she had written out in advance and carried in her purse through a snowstorm to place beside his plate on Christmas Eve, in front of his child. He put 2 fingers on the edge of the paper and pushed it back across the table until it stopped against her wine glass. No, nobody moved. Maisie looked up from her plate, sensing the change the way children do before they understand the words. Elena's face went red from the throat up. "You're really going to embarrass my mother on Christmas?" "I didn't embarrass her," Colin said. "I told her no." Judith laughed. It was a short, ugly sound with no humor in it at all. "You've become selfish." Colin turned to face her fully. "I've given you thousands of dollars. And you're keeping score?" "Because apparently you aren't." Elena stood up so fast her chair legs barked against the floor. "You're impossible." Colin stood too. Not fast. He put both hands on the table and rose the way a man rises when he has finally decided something. "No," he said. "I'm finished being treated like an ATM." The sentence went through the room and changed it. The candles kept burning. The record kept turning. But the house they had all been standing in for 8 years was gone, and every adult at that table knew it. Colin stayed on his feet. Across from him, Judith's mouth had opened slightly, and for the first time in 8 years he watched her genuinely search for what to say. She had 100 tools: guilt, tears, church, family, the memory of Elena's father, who had died when Elena was 19 and who got mentioned every time Judith needed leverage. She was choosing which one to use. Colin used the pause to look at his daughter. Maisie had gone very quiet. She was holding her fork in a fist, and she was watching the adults' faces the way you watch weather. "Maisie," Colin said and made his voice easy. "You want to go pick which movie we watch after dinner?" "Can I have 2? "You can have 2. She slid off her chair and went into the living room. Colin heard her start pulling cases off the shelf. He waited until she was out of the doorway before he sat back down. He was not calm. His heart was going hard enough that he could feel it in his ears. But he had learned something about himself over the years, which was that the angrier he got, the slower he became. Some men got loud. Colin got precise. He thought about his uncle. Colin Prescott had raised him for the 4 years after Colin's father left, and he had a way of saying things once and never repeating them. Colin had been maybe 19, sitting on the tailgate of Gordon's truck outside a job site, complaining about a cousin who kept borrowing money. "You want to help him?" Gordon had asked. "I already helped him 3 times. Gordon had taken a drink of coffee from a dented steel thermos and looked out at the road. "There's a difference between helping family and letting family use you," he had said. "Helping has an end to it. Somebody gets back on their feet, and it's done. The other thing never ends. It just gets bigger because the only thing you taught them is that you always say yes." Colin had rolled his eyes back then. 19-year-olds always do. He wasn't rolling his eyes now. Judith had found her tool. "Your father-in-law," she said, "God rest him, would be ashamed of the way you speak to me." Elena flinched slightly. She always did when her father came up. Colin looked at Judith and did not blink. "I never met him," he said, "but from everything Elena has told me, he worked 2 jobs for 22 years. I don't think he'd be ashamed of a man who wants to keep his family's savings intact." The wine glass in Judith's hand tilted a little. "How dare you?" "I'm not being cruel," Colin said. "I'm being clear. There's a difference, and I think it's been a long time since anyone was clear with you." Elena's voice came out thin. "Colin, stop." "I'd love to stop." He turned to her. "I've wanted to stop for 2 years. Every time I try, we end up right here, at a table, with a number in front of me." He gestured at the list, which was still sitting against Judith's wine glass where he had pushed it. "That's not a request," he said. "That's an invoice." Judith set her glass down. "Get out of my sight," she said. "It's my house." The words came out quietly, and they were the worst thing he could have said, because they were true, and everyone at the table knew he had paid for it alone for the last 3 years. Elena stared at him. "Wow," she said. "Elena." "No." "Say it again. Say your house." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." But it was out, and it had teeth, and the room had already taken it. In the living room, the movie menu music started playing, cheerful and bright, and completely out of place. Maisie called out, "Daddy, I picked 2. Colin closed his eyes for 1 second. "Good job, kiddo," he called back. "Give us a minute." Then he opened his eyes and looked at the 2 women who had spent the evening deciding, together, that his savings account was a family resource. Nobody had touched the food in 10 minutes. The turkey sat there under the light, going cold, still beautiful. He had a feeling he would remember that detail for the rest of his life. Elena sat back down, but she sat forward on the edge of the chair, the way people sit when they're not finished. Fine, she said. Let's talk about the money then. All of it. Okay. You have accounts I don't know about. Colin frowned. What? Don't do that. Don't make that face. Her voice was rising now, sliding up out of control. You've got savings somewhere. You always have. You've been putting money away for years and telling me we're tight. We are tight because I've been paying your mother's bills. You have a separate account. I have a retirement account, Colin said. You have one too. Yours is through the clinic. We have a joint household account that both of us can see right now on our phones, and I have never once moved money out of it without telling you. And the savings. Colin didn't look away. Yes, I have an emergency account. $18,000. It would cover the mortgage, insurance, and food for about 4 months if I got laid off. You've known about it since we opened it. You were sitting next to me at the bank. Elena's face was flushed. Then use it. For what? For my mother. No. She is an emergency. No. Colin said it flat. Your mother has a financial problem. That's not the same thing. An emergency is a thing you couldn't plan for. Your mother's situation has been the same for 6 years. Judith's hand came down on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. Don't talk about me like I'm some stranger. Colin turned to her. He kept his hands flat on the wood. Then stop treating me like your bank. Elena pushed her chair back and stood over him. You don't care about my mother. I care about her. I don't agree with her choices. She needs us. She needs a budget. Judith made a noise in her throat, a small, disgusted sound. Listen to him, she said to Elena. He thinks he's better than us. Colin shook his head slowly. No, I just don't think love means paying every bill someone hands me. He stood up to take his plate to the kitchen because he needed to move, because his hands wanted something to do that wasn't making a fist. Elena grabbed his arm. She caught him just above the elbow, fingers digging in through his shirt, and yanked him back around. Some of the wine on the table went over. Colin pulled his arm free. Don't. His voice came out low and hard, and it stopped her for a second. That was when Judith stepped between them. She was a small woman, 5'3" in shoes. She put herself in front of her daughter with her chin up, and she looked at Colin the way you look at something on the bottom of your shoe. You're trash, she said. My daughter deserves someone who actually provides. Then she slapped him. The sound was flat and sharp in the small room. His head turned with it. Heat bloomed across his cheekbone. Elena's voice cracked. Mom! Judith slapped him again, harder, backhanded, and her ring caught the corner of his lip. Colin tasted copper. He did not raise his hands. He did not raise his voice. He stood there with his arms at his sides, and one thought running through him with total clarity. Whatever happens next has to be something I can describe to a stranger in a room with a flag in it. Then he heard the small sound in the doorway. Maisie. She was standing there in her red Christmas socks, holding 2 movie cases against her chest, and she had seen it. All of it. The slap, at least. Maybe both. Something in Colin's chest went cold and simple. He was not angry anymore. Anger was a hot thing that made you stupid. This was the other thing. Judith turned and pointed at him with her whole arm. Take your trash and get out. Colin didn't answer her. He crossed the room, crouched down in front of his daughter, and put his hands on her shoulders. His lip was bleeding a little. He wiped it with the back of his wrist first, so she wouldn't have to look at it. Hey, he said. Get your coat. Maisie's eyes were huge. Are we going somewhere? We're going to Uncle Gordon's. He's got that dog. Rufus. Rufus. Yeah. Is Mommy coming? Elena's voice came from behind him, high and sharp and full of a fear that Colin heard clearly even then. You're not taking my daughter. Colin stood up. He kept one hand on Maisie's shoulder and turned so he was facing his wife directly. I'm taking her somewhere calm, he said. We'll talk when everyone is cooled down. Colin, you know exactly where we're going. You've known that number for 8 years. He got Maisie's coat off the hook. He knelt and worked the zipper up and got her boots on the right feet and found her mittens in the basket by the door because Elena kept them in the basket by the door and he knew that too. Judith said something behind him. He didn't listen to it. He opened the front door. Cold came in hard, carrying snow. He took Maisie's hand and they left. The snow was coming down in fat, slow flakes when he backed out of the driveway. Maisie was quiet for the first mile. Colin kept both hands on the wheel and let her be quiet. He drove 10 under the limit because the roads were slick and because his hands were not entirely steady, and he knew it. "Daddy." "Yeah, kiddo." "Grandma hit you." Colin let out a slow breath. "She did." "That's not allowed." "No," he said. "It's not. Are you going to be in trouble?" He glanced at her in the mirror. Her face was orange in the passing streetlights, then dark, then orange again. "No," he said. "You're not in trouble either. Nobody's in trouble. Grown-ups had a bad night, and that's a grown-up problem. It's not yours." She thought about this. "Can Rufus sleep in my room?" "You can ask him." She laughed a little, and Colin felt about 2% of the weight come off his chest. Gordon lived 11 minutes away, in a small brick house with a porch light that had been burning every night since Colin was a teenager. He opened the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, took one look at Colin's face and his granddaughter by blood or close enough standing beside him in snow-dusted mittens, and stepped back to let them in. "Kitchen's warm," Gordon said. "There's pie." While Maisie sat on the floor with the dog, Colin stood at the counter and took out his phone. He typed slowly. He read it twice before sending. "Maisie is safe with me. I am not keeping her from you. I am bringing her back tomorrow morning unless you want to pick her up sooner." Sent at 8:14 p.m. He watched the screen for a minute. Then 2. It said delivered. It did not say read. Gordon leaned against the doorframe with his arms folded. "You want to tell me?" "Not in front of her." "Fair." Gordon looked at Colin's lip. "Who?" "Judith." Gordon's jaw moved once. "Twice," Colin added. The old man nodded slowly and said nothing at all, which from Gordon meant a great deal. They put Maisie to bed in the back room at 9:30, under the quilt that had been Colin's when he was a boy. She wanted the door open and the hall light on. Colin left the door open and the hall light on. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he didn't drink. At 10:26, headlights swept across the front window. Colin stood up. He thought, for one stupid hopeful second, that it was Elena coming to get her daughter, and that they would say 5 careful sentences to each other in the driveway and start figuring out how to be adults. Then he saw the light bar on the roof. 2 officers came up the walk. One young, one older, both moving without hurry. Gordon opened the door. "Evening," the older one said. "We're looking for Colin Prescott." "That's me." The officer's eyes went to Colin's lip, and then away, professionally. "Sir, we've received a report from your wife. She's alleging a physical altercation this evening, and she's stating that you removed your daughter from the home without her permission." Colin heard it, and for a second the kitchen tilted. "I didn't hurt her." "Sir, we'll sort that out." "I texted her." Colin was already reaching for his phone. "I texted her the minute I got here. I told her where we were, and that I'd bring Maisie back in the morning." "You'll want to keep that message," the older officer said, and something in his tone was not unkind. "Right now, sir, I need you to turn around for me. My daughter's asleep in the back room. Is there a family member here who can stay with her?" "Yes," Gordon said. "Me." Colin turned around. The cuffs were cold. That surprised him. He had never thought about the temperature of them. Behind him, he heard a small sound and knew, without needing to turn, that Maisie was standing in the hallway again. She started to cry. That was the worst part. Not the metal. Not the words being read to him. The sound of his daughter crying in a doorway on Christmas Eve while a stranger walked her father to a car. He got his head turned enough to see Gordon. "Don't let her think I abandoned her," he said. Gordon put his hand on Maisie's shoulder. "I won't." They released him at 9:40 the next morning. Christmas Day. The station lobby had a small artificial tree on the counter with a strand of lights that were not plugged in. There were no charges filed. Elena had described a shove during an argument. Colin had described being struck twice by his mother-in-law. There were no visible marks on Elena, and there was a split in Colin's lip and a bruise coming up along his cheekbone. And the officer taking the statement had photographed both without comment. Gordon picked him up. Neither of them said much on the drive. Maisie ran at his legs, so hard she nearly knocked him over. He held her for a long time in Gordon's front hall with his coat still on and snow melting off his shoulders, and he did not let himself think about anything except how warm she was. At 11, He drove her home and handed her to her mother at the door. Elena's eyes were swollen. She wouldn't look at him for more than a second at a time. "Merry Christmas, Maisie," Colin said, and kissed the top of her head and drove away before his daughter could see his face change. The letter came the day after. Not a phone call, not a conversation. A letter from a law office in Columbus, in a heavy cream envelope with his name printed on it. Elena was filing for divorce. She was also requesting temporary child support, spousal support, and exclusive use of the marital home. Colin read it once in Gordon's kitchen, standing up. Then he sat down and read it again. Gordon poured coffee and sat across from him. "What are you going to do?" Colin set the letter down and pressed his thumbs into his eyes. "Get a lawyer." There was a long silence. The old clock over the stove ticked. "You still love her?" Gordon asked. Colin looked down at the table. At the letter. At the raised black type of a stranger's signature. "I loved who I thought she was." Gordon nodded once and let it go, which was the kindest thing he could have done. Natalie Reeves worked out of the second floor of a converted house on Sycamore Street, above a dentist's office. Her waiting room had 2 chairs, a water cooler, and a print of a lighthouse. Colin came in with a banker's box. She raised her eyebrows at it. "That's everything?" "That's everything." He set it on her desk and started taking things out while she watched. Bank statements, printed and highlighted. Every payment to Judith, listed on a single page with dates and amounts and the reason each one had been requested. Screenshots of text messages, printed in order. Preschool invoices. The pediatrician's portal records. Grocery receipts from a folder he had been keeping for tax reasons and had never expected to use for this. Natalie Reeves was 42, with reading glasses pushed up in her hair and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Gardener." She did not look impressed, and she did not look surprised. She looked like someone doing arithmetic. She went through the pages for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she took the glasses out of her hair and put them on. "Okay," she said. "Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. All right, the court is not going to punish your wife because her mother was financially irresponsible. Judges see a lot of families. Nobody is going to gasp. The court is going to look at 4 things: income, expenses, custody, and the child's best interests. That's it. That's the whole world for the next 6 months. I understand. Do you? Because most people who walk in here with a box like that want a moment. They want the judge to point at somebody and say the word wrong out loud." She tapped the stack. "That moment does not happen. What happens is numbers." Colin nodded slowly. "I can live with numbers." Something in her expression eased half a degree. "Good. Second thing, don't try to hide money." "I won't. I mean it. Don't move it. Don't lend it to your uncle for safekeeping. Don't close an account and open another one. Every dollar you try to hide costs you $10 of credibility, and credibility is the only currency that matters in that building." "I won't." Third, don't stop paying legitimate household or child expenses either. Not the mortgage, not the insurance, not the preschool, not one payment, not 1 month, not to make a point. Colin frowned. Even though she's asking the court to give her the house? Especially then. Natalie leaned back. Because in 90 days, somebody is going to stand in front of a judge and describe the kind of father you are. It would be very convenient for me if the record showed you kept every single obligation to your child while you were sleeping in your uncle's spare room. Colin was quiet for a second. "Fine. And the personal payments to your mother-in-law? Those stopped on Christmas Eve. Good. Those were never obligations. Those were gifts. Gifts can stop." She made a note. "Did you ever put any of it in writing as a loan?" "No." "Then don't pretend now that you did. You won't get it back, and trying will make you look small." "I don't want it back," Colin said. Natalie looked up. "Then what do you want?" He thought about the question honestly. It was the first time anyone had asked him one in weeks. "I want my daughter," he said. "I want a fair number I can actually pay, and I want it written down so nobody has to have this fight again in April. And I want to never open my wallet for Judith Carver again as long as I live." Natalie capped her pen. "2 of those 3 are legal goals," she said. "The third one is free." She stood and put her hand out. "Then your job is simple. Tell the truth and document everything. Every exchange. Every pickup. Every drop-off. Every text. Time-stamped. Boring. Neutral. You never send an angry message again. Not one. Not even a mild one. Assume a judge reads all of it out loud. Colin shook her hand. I can do that. It turned out he could. January was a bad month. He rented a small place on Warren Street, 1 bedroom plus a den he turned into Maisie's room, and he spent 2 weekends assembling a bed frame and screwing a shelf into a wall so his daughter would have somewhere to put her books. He bought a nightlight shaped like a moon because the old one had stayed at the house, and he was not going to argue about a nightlight. He kept every appointment. He paid the mortgage on a house he was not allowed to sleep in. He paid the preschool. He paid the health insurance premium out of his own check. And he wrote everything down. Elena's filings got more aggressive as the weeks went on, and Colin recognized the fingerprints on them. The language kept sliding away from the woman he had married. He knew what Judith's voice sounded like in a sentence. The demand for temporary spousal support was substantial. Elena argued that she had reduced her hours at the dental clinic to care for Maisie and had done so at Colin's insistence. She argued that she had been the primary parent in every meaningful way. Colin did not deny that Elena had cared for their daughter. He said so directly in his own affidavit in one sentence because Natalie told him that a man who admits the true parts is believed on the disputed parts. Then he laid out the rest. He showed the preschool sign-in sheets, which recorded a parent's signature and a time for every drop-off and pickup, going back 2 years. His name was on about 70% of them. His shift started at 7, and he had negotiated a late start twice a week specifically, so he could do the morning run. He showed the pediatric records. 12 appointments in 2 years. He had been present for 9 of them, and he was listed as the reporting parent on the intake forms for the ear infections because he was the one who had noticed her pulling at her ear. He showed the grocery receipts, itemized, paid from the joint account he funded. He showed the preschool tuition, paid by automatic transfer from his own account for 3 straight years. Natalie did not editorialize on any of it. She submitted it in a binder with tabs. And then Judith did something that no one on Colin's side had asked her to do. Elena's temporary support claim included a household hardship argument, and part of that argument was that her mother, who lived nearby and provided childcare assistance, was herself financially dependent and could not contribute. To support it, Judith voluntarily submitted her own financial disclosure to the court. She wanted to prove she was poor. Colin never went looking for it. He didn't hire an investigator. He didn't have to. Judith walked it in through the front door of the courthouse in a manila folder and handed it to a clerk. Natalie called him at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday. He was in his truck outside a warehouse inspection with the engine running. Are you sitting down? I'm parked. Close enough. He could hear her turning pages. Your mother-in-law submitted 12 months of bank records to establish hardship. Okay. Colin, she wasn't facing eviction. He went very still. The wipers pushed a wash of slush off the windshield. Say that again. She was never within 60 days of an eviction filing in the last 2 years. I checked the county docket. There's no case. There's not even a notice. Pages turned. What there is a cruise deposit in March. $940. There's a second payment in April, $1,280. There's a resort charge in Gatlinburg over Labor Day weekend. Colin closed his eyes. There's a lot of restaurants, Natalie went on, in the flat voice of a woman reading a grocery list. Not fast food. Sit-down places, $40 to $90 a visit, 2 and 3 times a week. There's a department store pattern. There's an $1,100 charge at a jeweler in October. October, Colin repeated. Does that mean something? She asked me for $430 for a car repair in October. She said the alternator went out and she couldn't get to her doctor's appointments. There was a pause on the line. Was there a repair shop charge? Natalie's pages moved again. No, she said. There's no automotive charge that month at all. Colin sat in his truck in a gravel lot with the heater blowing on his hands, and he waited to feel angry. What he felt instead was something clean and cold and almost restful. For 2 years, he had been carrying a private worry that he was a hard man, that maybe he was the one who had changed, the way Judith said, that maybe a better husband would have just written the checks and kept his mouth shut and not made his wife choose between him and her mother on Christmas Eve. Now he knew. He hadn't been cruel. He had been slow. What do we do with it? He asked. Natalie's answer came without hesitation. Nothing dramatic. We do not accuse anyone of fraud. We do not use the word liar in any document I put my name on. We attach her own disclosure as an exhibit. We build a simple 2-column chart, and we let the judge do the reading. That's it. That's it. Colin, listen to me carefully. Her voice sharpened. The strongest thing you will ever do in that courtroom is stay quiet while the paperwork talks. The second she can call you angry, you lose the high ground. And she will try. He watched the sleet come across the lot in a long gray sheet. I understand, he said. The chart went in 3 weeks later. 2 columns. On the left, the dates and amounts Colin had transferred to Judith Carver and the stated reason for each. On the right, Judith's own reported spending in the same weeks, taken word for word from the disclosure she had submitted herself. $900 for rent, December. $410 in restaurant charges the same week. $640 for an electric bill, August. Resort lodging charge, same month. $430 for a car repair, October. No repair. Jewelry. Natalie did not make a speech. She entered it as an exhibit and moved on to the parenting schedule. But Colin was watching the bench when the judge reached that page. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with steel-colored hair and half-frame glasses, and she had spent the morning looking mildly tired. She read the left column. She read the right column. Her eyes went back to the left column. Then she looked up over her glasses, not at Colin and not at Elena, at Judith Carver, sitting in the second row of the gallery in a good coat. She looked at her for about 4 seconds. Then she went back to her papers and said, "Continue, counselor," in a completely neutral voice. For seconds. That was all it was. But Colin had spent 15 years reading rooms full of people who wanted him to sign something, and he knew exactly what he had just watched. The money fight was over. Now it was a custody fight, and Judith Carver had just handed him the only thing he actually needed. The thing that finished it did not come from a lawyer, or a bank, or a courtroom. It came from a doorbell. Brooke Dalton lived across the street and 2 houses down, in the blue split level with the wind chimes. She had been broken into the previous spring, and afterward her son had installed a camera above her front door that faced out toward the street. Colin had helped her carry a washing machine up her basement stairs once. That was the extent of their friendship. They waved. They talked about the plow schedule. She called him in February. "Colin, this might be nothing," she said, and she sounded uncomfortable, the way decent people sound when they know something they didn't ask to know. "My camera keeps 30 days of clips on the cloud plan, and I only just went back through them looking for a package. There's footage from Christmas Eve." Colin sat down on the edge of his bed on Warren Street. "Of what?" "Of you leaving with your daughter." He gave the number to Natalie that night. The footage was not dramatic. That was exactly what made it work. The camera was mounted at an angle across the street, and it caught the front of the Prescott house in a grainy wide shot with snow moving through the frame. The audio picked up whatever happened within about 30 feet of the door, which on a still winter night with no traffic was a great deal. It did not capture the dinner. It did not capture the slaps. Natalie was clear about that with the court from the first sentence. What it captured was the doorway. At 7:58 p.m., the porch light came on and the front door opened. Judith Carver's voice came through first, loud and unmistakable, carrying across the empty street. "Take that child and get out." Then Colin lower, harder to hear but clear enough on the enhanced audio the court accepted. "I'm taking her somewhere safe. We'll talk tomorrow." Elena's voice, from further inside. "You can't just leave with her." And Colin again, already on the walk, one hand holding his daughter's. "I'm not hiding her. You know exactly where we're going." Then the truck door. Then the engine. Then nothing but snow falling through the frame for 4 more minutes. And, at 8:03, the porch light going off. Natalie played it in chambers first, and then in the hearing without commentary. Colin watched his own back walking down that path in grainy black and white and felt nothing at all except a distant, quiet gratitude toward a neighbor who had wanted to find a missing package. Then Natalie entered the second exhibit. His text message, sent from Gordon's kitchen. Timestamped 8:14 p.m. 16 minutes after the porch light came on. "Maisie is safe with me. I am not keeping her from you. I am bringing her back tomorrow morning unless you want to pick her up sooner." Delivered. Not replied to. And behind that, the call record. Elena's call to the non-emergency police line at 10:11 p.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes after she had been told exactly where her daughter was, by a man who had also told her when he was bringing her home. Elena's attorney tried to work with it. He argued that his client had been frightened, that she had been in shock, that a mother's fear is not a calculation. It was not a bad argument. Colin could see the judge weighing it. But the phrase secretly removed the child had been in the original filing, in writing, and no amount of context could pull it back out. The camera had recorded a man announcing his destination on a lit porch in front of a witness's house. The kidnapping allegation did not collapse in a single dramatic moment. It just quietly stopped being mentioned. By March, nobody on Elena's side said the word again. The custody hearing was in April, on a warm day that felt wrong for what it was. The courtroom smelled like floor polish and old paper. There was a radiator under the window that clanked twice an hour. Colin wore the gray suit he had bought for his mother's funeral and had worn 3 times since. Elena testified first. She said he was controlling. She said he made her feel monitored, that he tracked spending, that he made her justify purchases. She said she had been isolated from her family. She cried twice, and Colin believed both times were real. He listened to all of it with his hands folded on the table. Natalie had told him what to do during that testimony, and it was the hardest instruction he ever followed. Don't shake your head. Don't sigh. Don't look at the ceiling. Don't take notes fast. You listen to every word like it's the most important thing you've ever heard, because a judge watches the person who isn't talking. So he listened. When it was his turn, he did not attack her. He was asked whether he had ever restricted her access to money, and he said no, and gave the account number she had held for 8 years. He was asked whether he had tracked her purchases, and he said he tracked all purchases, including his own, and that he had brought the spreadsheet, and that it went back to 2019. He was asked whether he had ever raised his hands to his wife. No, he said. Not on Christmas Eve. Not ever. Then the judge herself set her pen down, took off her glasses, and asked him a question that was not on anyone's list. Mr. Prescott, do you believe the mother is dangerous to the child? The room got quiet. Colin felt his attorney go still beside him. He knew what she wanted him to say, and he knew what a certain kind of man would say, and he understood in that moment that this single question was the entire hearing. He could have taken it. There was room in the record to take it. The camera, the accusation, the arrest on Christmas Eve, the 2 hours of silence. He could have said yes, and half the gallery would have understood why. He thought about a bathtub. Elena on her knees on the tile at 2 in the morning with a screaming 8-month-old, singing the same 4 lines over and over, her hair soaked, refusing to hand the baby over because she said she had it. She had it. She was fine. He paused. No, he said. Elena's head came up. She looked genuinely startled. Colin kept his eyes on the bench. But I believe she has allowed her mother to influence decisions that should belong to the parents. Every serious conflict in my marriage in the last 3 years started with a request from Judith Carver and ended with my wife carrying it into our house. The judge wrote something. Would you support your daughter having a relationship with her mother? Yes. Even after what happened? Colin nodded once. Maisie shouldn't lose her mother because her parents are getting divorced. Elena started crying. Not the controlled kind, the kind that gets into the shoulders. Colin turned his head and looked at her, and he did not soften, and he did not smile, and what he said next he said in the same flat, careful voice he had used for everything else that morning. But Maisie also shouldn't lose her father because her mother was angry about money. The radiator clanked. Nobody said anything for several seconds. The court reporter's hands rested. Somewhere out in the hallway, a door swung shut. Then the judge put her glasses back on. Thank you, Mr. Prescott. The ruling came down 11 days later, in a document that was 9 pages long and used no adjectives at all. The court ordered a structured parenting arrangement with a fixed schedule, defined holidays, and a written exchange protocol. Colin received substantial parenting time, more than the state's standard allocation, with alternating weeks during the summer. He remained responsible for his daughter's normal expenses, which he had never once asked to be relieved of. Elena did not receive the sweeping custody arrangement she had requested. Her demand for extensive spousal support was reduced substantially, based on her documented earning capacity, her voluntary reduction in hours, and the applicable state guidelines. The house was ordered sold, with the equity divided. There was one paragraph near the end that Colin read 4 times. The court noted the conflict surrounding the events of December 24th and directed that contact between the child and the maternal grandmother occur only during the mother's parenting time, at the mother's discretion and supervision, and that the grandmother not be present at any custody exchange. It was written in dry, bloodless language. It was the most decisive thing in the entire order. Judith Carver had built something over 6 years, and she had built it well. It was not complicated. It only had 2 parts. Elena depended on Colin, and Judith depended on Elena. As long as those 2 connections held, Judith had access to a municipal salary and a man who couldn't stand to see anyone go without heat. The divorce cut the first connection, and when it went, the second one had nothing to hang from. Colin stopped paying her bills the night she slapped him, and he never started again. He did not do it as revenge. He wanted to be clear about that with himself because he knew the difference mattered and because he had watched what revenge did to men in his line of work. He stopped because the bills had never been his in the first place, and because a court had now written down in 9 pages exactly what his obligations were. Nowhere on those 9 pages was there a line for Judith Carver's electric bill. She called him in May. He let it ring. She called twice in June, once from her own number, once from a number he didn't know, which he answered, and hung up on when he heard her voice say his name. She left messages. He listened to the first one and deleted the rest without playing them. It was a 2-minute performance that started warm and ended cold, and he could hear the exact scene where she changed tactics. In July, she showed up at a soccer camp pickup. Colin saw her standing at the fence in sunglasses, watching the field, and he felt his whole body go tight. He walked over to the coach, told him quietly that his daughter's grandmother was not authorized for pickup, and then he walked to the fence. "You need to go," he said. "I have a right to see my granddaughter. You have exactly the rights a judge gave you. You can see her at Elena's house, when Elena is there. That's it. That's the whole list." Judith took her sunglasses off. Her eyes were wet, and Colin noted, with a kind of clinical distance, how quickly she had gotten them that way. "You've turned my daughter against me. Your daughter watched you hit her husband in front of her child," Colin said. "I've never once had to tell her a thing about you. You've been doing that yourself for years. I raised her alone." "I know. And you've been sending her the bill for it ever since." She stared at him. He walked back to the field, collected Maisie, buckled her in, and drove home with his hands steady on the wheel. In the mirror, Judith was still standing at the fence. He logged it that night. Date, time, location, exactly what was said. He sent it to Natalie in an email with no adjectives in it. Boring. Neutral. The last message came in September. "After everything I've done for this family, this is how you treat me?" Colin read it standing in his kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder. Maisie was at the table doing a worksheet about the letter G. He thought about it for a while. Then he typed one reply, and he typed it slowly because he wanted it to be exactly right, and he wanted it to be the last thing he ever said to her. "I helped you because I wanted to help. I will not continue paying expenses you can manage yourself." He hit send. Then he blocked the number. He set the phone face down on the counter and went back to the dishes, and he waited for the guilt to arrive, because it always had before. 20 years of being the man who fixed things. The guilt was reliable. The guilt was practically furniture. It didn't come. Judith had spent 6 years believing that guilt would always work on him, because for 6 years it always had. She had never needed a new tool. Nobody buys a second hammer when the first one still drives the nail. The nail had stopped going in. The divorce was finalized in the fall. Colin signed the final papers on a Tuesday morning and was back at a job site by 11, checking egress widths in a strip mall renovation, and the strangest part of the whole day was how ordinary it was. Elena had expected things. Colin could see them all, laid out in her face over the following months, one by one, as each of them failed to happen. She had expected him to come back. He didn't. Not in October, when the house sold, and she had to pack the kitchen alone. Not in November, when her car needed brakes, and she called him, and he gave her the name of a good shop, and nothing else. She had expected him to keep paying many of her expenses out of habit, or guilt, or love. He paid the ordered amount, on the first of the month, by automatic transfer, and not $1 more. She had expected the court to side with her automatically because she was Maisie's mother. It hadn't, and most of all, she had expected him to fight for the marriage, to beg, to show up on her doorstep at some point in that terrible year and say the words that would let her be the one who decided. He never did. They met in October at a diner near the exchange point because she asked to talk and because Natalie said a public place with a receipt was fine. Elena looked thinner. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking from. "Do you really hate me?" she asked. Colin shook his head. No. Her shoulders came down an inch. Relief crossed her face, and he watched her start to build something on top of it. "I thought you did. I don't hate you. You let a beat pass. But I'm not coming back." The cup shook in her hands. She set it down and pressed her fingers under her eyes. "Can't we fix this?" Colin looked out the window at the parking lot, at a man scraping frost off a windshield with a credit card. He thought about what fixing would mean. It would mean a conversation about her mother that they had already had 11 times. It would mean a promise, and a promise would hold for about 4 months, until the first phone call about a car repair. "We could have fixed our marriage before Christmas," he said. She wiped her eyes. "And now? Now we're just parents who have to learn how to work together." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the give that had always been there before, the soft place in him she had known how to press. She didn't find it. That was the end of the marriage. Not the courthouse, a diner booth, and a woman finally understanding that the man across from her had stopped being persuadable. A year after that Christmas Eve, Colin and Maisie were living in a small house on the east side of Cedar Ridge, near the elementary school and the creek. It was not as large as the old house. The kitchen had one counter and a window over the sink. The backyard was mostly gravel and one crooked maple. The furnace made a sound like a man clearing his throat every time it kicked on, and Colin had learned to hear it as company. But it was quiet. That was the thing he hadn't expected to value so much. There was no low hum in the walls, no waiting for a phone to ring, no sense of a conversation happening in another room about what he owed. Maisie had a small bedroom at the back with a bookshelf he had built himself out of pine and screwed into the studs. A stuffed rabbit that had lost most of one ear. A nightlight shaped like a moon. She had 2 houses now, and she had learned the schedule the way children learn things, completely and without complaint. Mommy's house on these days. Daddy's house on these days. She kept a toothbrush in both and a specific pair of purple socks at Colin's that she refused to let travel. Elena had regular parenting time, and she used all of it. Whatever else had happened, she showed up. Colin gave her that, privately, and without ever needing to say it out loud. He never spoke badly about her in front of Maisie. Not once. Not on the hard days. Not on the day Elena was 40 minutes late for an exchange. Not on the day Maisie came back saying Mommy had cried in the car. He said the same thing every time. "Your mom loves you. Grown-up stuff is grown-up stuff." The court's paragraph about Judith held. Her contact with Maisie stayed limited to Elena's time, supervised by Elena, because of the conflict and the events surrounding the separation. Judith hated that more than anything else in the entire divorce. She said so to anyone who would listen. She blamed Colin and told half of Cedar Ridge that he had used lawyers to steal a grandmother's rights. Nobody who mattered believed her, mostly because the person who had put those events into the record was Judith herself. And Elena, eventually, blamed her mother. It happened slowly over a year in pieces. Colin heard about it only in fragments, from Gordon, from a mutual friend, once from Maisie, who mentioned that Mommy and Grandma had a fight about a phone. Their relationship became strained, then distant. For most of her life, Elena had believed her mother always knew best. That belief had cost her a marriage, a house, and a certain kind of respect from the person who had once fixed her radiator and checked her tires before every long drive. She could see the price of it now, itemized, the way Colin had once itemized everything else. Her marriage was gone. Her mother had lost the control she once had. And Colin was no longer standing at the end of every problem with a checkbook. Colin took no pleasure in any of it. He also did not lose 1 hour of sleep. The next Christmas Eve, snow came early and stayed. Colin made dinner with Maisie in the small kitchen. Not turkey. He had decided that first year that they would never do turkey again, and had never explained why, and Maisie had never asked. They made lasagna and garlic bread, and she was in charge of layering the cheese, which meant most of it went in one corner. Music played from a speaker on the windowsill. The same old songs, without the hiss. Afterward, they did the tree. It was a small tree for feet, standing on a side table because Rufus the dog now lived with them and had opinions about branches. Gordon had brought him over in the spring, saying he was getting too old to walk him twice a day, which was a lie both of them let stand. Maisie held up an ornament. It was a wooden star with her handprint painted on it from preschool, green paint, a little cracked. "Daddy, this one goes here." She pointed at a spot in the middle of the tree, low where nobody would see it. "Perfect," Colin said. He hung it exactly where she pointed. She stepped back and looked around the room, at the tree, at the dog asleep by the radiator, at the paper snowflakes taped along the bottom 2 feet of the window, because that was still where she liked them. "Are you happy?" Colin stopped with an ornament hook in his hand. He looked at his daughter, 6 years old now, missing a bottom tooth, waiting for an answer with the total seriousness that children bring to questions adults have learned to dodge. "Yes," he said. "Even though Mommy doesn't live here?" He set the hook down and sat on the floor beside her, his back against the couch. "Sometimes families change," he said. Maisie nodded slowly, taking it in. "Is that bad?" "Not always." She thought about it for a while. The furnace cleared its throat. Snow moved past the window in the porch light. Then she smiled. "I like our house." Colin looked at the tree, at the crooked star with her handprint on it hanging in a spot nobody would ever notice. So did he. That first Christmas had nearly destroyed him. He had lost a marriage, a home, and one night in a holding cell that he would never fully stop remembering. But it had forced him to learn something he should have learned at 19, sitting on the tailgate of his uncle's truck. Generosity and obligation are not the same thing. Generosity is something you choose. Obligation is something someone else decides for you. And the moment you let another person set the amount, the date, and the guilt, you have not been generous at all. You have simply been convenient. Elena had lost the husband she thought would always pay. Judith had lost the son-in-law she had treated like a machine in a wall. And Colin had lost a marriage. But he had gained the thing he had been missing for years, and it was smaller and plainer than anyone would have guessed. A life where saying no did not require an apology. He never forgave Judith. Not that Christmas, not the next one. She sent a card the following year, and he threw it away unopened, and felt nothing. He never went back to Elena, no matter how many times she asked, and she asked 3 more times over the years, each one quieter than the last. He never used his daughter as a weapon, not once, because Maisie was the only thing in the whole story that had never been a bargaining chip. He simply stopped letting them control him, and in the end, that was the hardest consequence either of them ever faced. Because for the first time in 8 years, the man they had treated like an ATM had finally closed the account.